The moment my name appeared on the courtroom projector screen, my aunt dropped her coffee thermos. It hit the marble floor and the sound echoed through the whole room. My brother-in-law, sitting 3 rows behind the defense table, went so pale I thought he was going to pass out, and my sister, who had spent the better part of 4 years telling anyone who'd listen that I was wasting my life, that I had no direction, that I'd thrown away every opportunity handed to me. She just stared at the screen, then she looked at me, then back at the screen, like she was trying to reconcile 2 images that couldn't exist in the same universe. The screen read, Senior Investigator, Renfield County Insurance Fraud Task Force. Lead Analyst, Operation Clearwater. My name underneath it. I'd waited a long time for that moment. Longer than anyone in that courtroom knew. Let me go back to where it actually started. Not the beginning of the case, but the beginning of everything that made the case possible. It was the 4th of July, 3 years before the trial. My brother-in-law Fletcher had just finished his second renovation on a house he'd bought for $260,000 in a neighborhood outside Columbus. He was planning to flip it. That was his thing, real estate. He had 4 properties at the time, leveraged through a private lending group called Ashwood Capital Partners, run by his college friend and business partner, a man named Conrad Vale. I'd been hearing about Conrad for 2 years by that point. Fletcher talked about him the way people talk about a mentor who also happens to be a close friend, with this particular mixture of reverence and ease that I always found slightly uncomfortable. Conrad had the properties. Conrad had the connections. Conrad knew which neighborhoods were about to turn, which banks were still lending aggressively, which appraisers could be trusted to see the value in a project. Before the market caught up, that July 4th, I was sitting on the back deck of my sister's house in Bexley, while Fletcher talked through a new deal with Conrad on the phone inside. My sister Vivienne was slicing watermelon at the outdoor table and telling me, again, gently but unmistakably, that I should think about what I really wanted to do with my life. I was 28. I had a bachelor's in accounting and a part-time job doing bookkeeping for 3 small businesses out of my apartment. I'd left my position at a mid-size insurance firm the year before, just walked away from a salaried job with benefits, which in my family's vocabulary was roughly equivalent to setting money on fire in front of them. You're smart enough to do something real, Vivienne said. She wasn't being cruel. That was the worst part. She genuinely believed she was helping. You could go back and finish your CPA. Fletcher could probably connect you with someone at his firm. I'm okay, I said. You're surviving. That's not the same thing. Fletcher came back out with a beer and dropped into the chair beside her. Conrad wants to move on the Fairfield property by the end of the month, he said to Vivienne, then glanced at me. You still doing that bookkeeping thing? That bookkeeping thing. Yeah, I said. He nodded the way you nod when someone tells you they're still doing something. You don't quite understand why they're still doing. What nobody on that deck knew, what I hadn't told anyone, not even my mother, was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd been approached by a woman named Agent Tasha Drummond from the Ohio Department of Insurance Fraud Division. She'd heard about me through a contact at one of the small businesses I worked with, a dental practice that had filed an unusual insurance claim the year before. I'd flagged the irregularity internally, and apparently someone paid attention. Tasha asked if I'd be willing to consult on a case they were building, something in the private lending sector. She mentioned Ashwood Capital Partners. I told her I'd think about it. I called her back the next morning. The reason I'd left my insurance job had nothing to do with burnout, which is what I told my family. 18 months before that July 4th, I'd been processing commercial property claims at Meridian Insurance when I noticed a pattern. 3 separate properties, all insured through Meridian, all located in a corridor of Franklin County that had been experiencing rapid development. Each property had been appraised at values that seemed aggressive. Not impossible, but on the edge. 2 of them had the same appraiser. One of them appeared in our system twice, with different ownership documentation 6 months apart. I brought it to my supervisor. He told me the appraisals had already been reviewed. I brought it to compliance. They thanked me and told me it was being handled. 3 weeks later, my supervisor pulled me aside and told me there had been some concerns raised about my collaborative attitude. He suggested I focus on my assigned caseload. I started keeping a copy of everything I flagged on a personal drive. Then I got a call from a woman at the Ohio Department of Insurance. Not Tasha, someone else, who asked me if I'd be willing to speak informally about what I'd seen. I said yes. Then someone left a note on my car in the Meridian parking garage. Handwritten. It just said, "Be careful what you share." I quit the next week. Took the bookkeeping work. Waited. Tasha was the reason I'd been waiting. By the time Fletcher was talking about the Fairfield property on that July 4th, I'd been working with Tasha's team for 6 weeks. I was a consultant with restricted access to preliminary case materials. What I'd seen was enough to know that Ashwood Capital Partners was not a legitimate lending operation. It was the center of an insurance fraud scheme that worked in 3 layers. Layer 1. Conrad Vale and his associates would identify distressed properties and purchase them at or below market value through Shell LLCs. Layer 2. A network of complicit appraisers would inflate the property values, sometimes by 40%, sometimes more, which allowed them to take out larger loans than the properties justified, and to charge buyers like Fletcher inflated prices while appearing to offer them a good deal. Layer 3. The properties were overinsured at their fraudulent appraised values. When select properties experienced conveniently timed damage, fires, pipe bursts, structural failures, the insurance payouts came in at the inflated valuations. The claims were processed by a contact inside a regional insurance broker who kicked back a percentage of every settled claim. Fletcher didn't know any of this. I was almost certain of that. He was a buyer who'd been sold an inflated asset at what looked like a fair market price. He was also technically the insured party on 2 properties that had filed suspicious claims in the previous 18 months. That was the part that kept me up at night. I want to tell you about my neighbor across the hall. Her name was June. She was 63, recently retired from teaching 4th grade, and she had invested her entire retirement savings, $212,000, into a property fund that turned out to be managed through one of Conrad's shell companies. She didn't know that. She thought she was investing in a legitimate real estate fund through a financial advisor named Ryan, who was later identified as one of Conrad's early recruits. I met June the month I moved into my building, 2 years before all of this. She'd baked banana bread for every unit on the floor. She had a photograph of her class from 1998 on her refrigerator. She called her niece every Sunday evening without fail because her niece was the only family she had left. I didn't know about the investment when I met her. I found out through Tasha's team 8 months into the investigation. When I saw June's name in the victim documentation, I sat in my car outside my building for 20 minutes before I could go upstairs. I knocked on her door that evening with some excuse about a package delivery, just to see if she was okay. She made me tea. She was talking about a trip she was planning to take to see her niece in Portland. She didn't know yet that the fund was frozen, that her money was gone, that the trip wasn't happening. That's the thing about fraud cases. The most real part of them is the most invisible. The investigation moved in stages I wasn't always privy to, which is how it's supposed to work. What I contributed was pattern analysis, cross-referencing property records, insurance filings, appraisal histories, and loan documentation in ways that took a trained eye to decode. I could look at a set of numbers and tell you which ones had been built backwards from a desired outcome. It's a particular skill. Not glamorous. Not the kind of thing that gets narrated in courtrooms, usually. But then the case got complicated in a way nobody expected. 7 months into the investigation, Tasha called me in for a meeting and showed me a financial record I hadn't seen before. It was a consulting invoice from Fletcher's renovation business, his legitimate contracting LLC, to one of Conrad's shell companies. 5 invoices total, moderate amounts, nothing that would flag immediately. The invoices were for project management consultation on 3 properties. Fletcher had worked with Conrad directly, not just as a buyer, as a consultant. We don't think he was aware of the full structure, Tasha said carefully, but we need you to understand what you might be looking at. I understood what I was looking at. I asked for 24 hours. She gave me 48. I didn't tell Vivienne. I didn't tell my mother. I drove to my parents' house that evening and had dinner with them and listened to my father talk about his garden and drove home and sat in the dark for a while. What I could not unknow was that my brother-in-law had a paper connection to a fraud operation. Whether that connection was innocent, and I believed it was, the paper didn't care about intentions. If the investigation led where it was heading, Fletcher's name was going to come up. Vivienne's name, by extension, was on 2 of those properties as a co-insured party. I went back to Tasha the next day and told her everything I knew about Fletcher's involvement with the renovation work, including things I'd heard at family dinners that I hadn't thought to flag, because they seemed routine at the time. Details. It's about timelines is the name of a contractor Fletcher had mentioned, a property address I'd heard in passing. I did it because it was the only way to help him. The only way to make sure that when everything surfaced, his name was on the right side of the documentation. What I didn't know was that Vivienne had found out something on her own. 2 months before the arrests, she texted me at 11 at night. Can you come over? Not tomorrow. Tonight if you can. She was at the kitchen table when I got there, Fletcher asleep upstairs, and she had a folder open in front of her. She'd been going through the property files, because they were refinancing one of the houses. And she'd needed some documentation. And she'd found a discrepancy she couldn't explain. An appraisal on one property that was $60,000 higher than what they'd paid for it. 8 months earlier, with no renovations completed in between. I looked it up, she said. Her voice was very controlled. The appraiser who signed this did 4 other properties in our portfolio. I looked those up too. She pushed the folder toward me. The numbers were exactly what Tasha's team already had. Vivienne looked at me across the table, and something in my face must have answered before I did, because she went very still. "How long have you known?" she asked. The kitchen felt very small. "Vivienne, how long?" I told her the truth. I'd been working with investigators for over a year. I'd flagged Fletcher's consulting invoices myself, months ago, and I'd done it specifically to protect him. I told her what the investigation had found. I told her what Conrad Vale had been running. I told her that Fletcher was almost certainly going to be interviewed, but that I had done everything in my ability to make sure there was a clear record of what he did and didn't know. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You've been sitting at our dinner table for a year knowing this." "Yes. And you never said anything." "I couldn't. Legally. And also, I stopped. If I told you, you might have told Fletcher. And if Fletcher changed his behavior or contacted Conrad, it could have compromised." "I know," she said. "I know why. I just need to sit with it." She closed the folder. She put her hands flat on the table. "Is he going to be charged?" "I don't believe so. The documentation supports that his involvement was unknowing." She nodded slowly. She didn't cry. Vivienne has never been someone who cries in front of other people. She just sat there and breathed. Then she said, "What do I do with what I found?" "You give it to me," I said. "And I take it to the team. Will it help?" "It'll corroborate what we already have, which helps close it faster." She pushed the folder across the table without another word. The arrest operation happened on a Tuesday in November. Conrad Vale was taken into custody at his office in Worthington. His two primary associates were picked up within an hour. Ryan, the financial advisor, had already entered into a cooperation agreement 3 weeks earlier. The appraiser network took another week to process fully. 6 individuals across 3 counties. Fletcher was not among them. He was interviewed twice by investigators, voluntarily, with his own attorney. His cooperation was documented, and his status as a non-culpable party was confirmed in writing before the trial began. When he found out what I'd been doing, really found out, not just the polished version he got from attorneys, he called me. He didn't know what to say at first. There was a long pause on the phone. "You flagged my invoices yourself," he finally said. "Yes, to protect me, to make sure the record was accurate." Another pause. "You could have told me." "No," I said, "I couldn't. Not in a way that would have actually helped you." He was quiet for a moment. "Vivienne was right. You're the sharpest person in this family. I think I always knew that, and I didn't treat you like it." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said, "I know you didn't mean anything by it. That's the thing," he said. "Not meaning it doesn't make it not true." The trial ran for 9 days. Conrad Vale's defense strategy followed a predictable pattern. I was characterized as a disgruntled ex-employee with an axe to grind against the real estate industry. My work as a bookkeeper was referenced repeatedly as evidence that I lacked the expertise to properly interpret financial documents. His attorney used the phrase, "jump to conclusions" 11 times. I counted because that's the kind of thing I do. What he couldn't account for was 4 years of documented property records. 17 properties, 22 fraudulent appraisals, 8 insurance claims totaling $3.4 million in fraudulent payouts. 6 cooperating witnesses including Ryan, who had kept meticulous records of every communication with Conrad's team, and Vivienne's folder, which had provided the final corroboration that tied a specific set of transactions to Conrad's personal, financial accounts. Conrad was convicted on 19 counts. The 2 associates received sentences between 4 and 7 years depending on their cooperation. Ryan received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. The appraiser at the center of the network had his license permanently revoked. The civil proceedings were slower. The shell companies were unwound. Victim restitution was ordered. It took 2 more years to process, and not everyone made whole will ever feel whole. June didn't go to the trial. She found out about her money in the way most victims do. A letter from an attorney explaining that a fund she'd invested in had been frozen as part of a fraud investigation. She came to my door the evening she got the letter. I made her tea this time. We sat in my apartment and I explained as much as I was allowed to. She listened very carefully. She asked how long the restitution process would take. I told her I didn't know. That it depended on how much could be recovered. That I was sorry I didn't have a better answer. She set down her cup. She said, "I'm not going to be angry at you. You were trying to get the money back. That's more than most people would do." She paused. "I just wish someone had caught it sooner." "So do I said, "every day." She got partial restitution. About 60% of what she'd lost. She didn't take the Portland trip that year, or the next. The 3rd year she did. She showed me pictures when she got back. Her niece's kids, a bridge, a food cart, a particularly good sunset. She seemed lighter than she'd been in a while. I think about the 60% she didn't get back. I think about it more than the numbers that did work out. My consulting arrangement with Tasha's team became a staff position. I took the CPA exam, finally, and passed all 4 sections. I work financial fraud cases now. mostly insurance-related, but sometimes crossing into tax and securities. Tasha is still my supervisor and the most methodical thinker I've worked alongside. I don't talk about the Ashwood case much. This is the first time I've laid it all out from the beginning. The hardest part wasn't the trial, or the moment in the courtroom when I watched my brother-in-law understand what I'd been doing. The hardest part was the first dinner afterward, at my parents' house, 6 weeks after the verdicts. Vivian and I sat next to each other. She passed me the rolls before I asked. Fletcher poured my water. Nobody said anything directly about any of it. My mother, who still doesn't fully understand what I did or how, reached over and patted my hand the same way she always has, automatically. Because I was her daughter, and that's what she does. I let her. I didn't try to explain anything. After dinner, Vivian and I stood in the driveway while Fletcher helped my father carry in the outdoor chairs. She had her arms crossed against the November cold. "I owe you an apology," she said, not looking at me, looking at the street. "You don't. I told you for years that you were wasting yourself. You were working with what you could see." She turned and looked at me then. My sister, who is 4 years older and has always known exactly what she wanted and has always gotten it. She looked at me the way she used to when we were kids, and I'd surprised her, which didn't happen often. "I should have known better," she said. "You always were the one who saw what other people missed." I didn't answer that. There wasn't a clean answer. What I know is this. Fraud cases don't end at the verdict. The damage moves through people's lives in ways that don't show up in sentencing documents. June 60%. The family that lost their house in Worthington when a flipped property's financing collapsed. The young couple in Hilliard who bought a home appraised fraudulently and are still, as of last year, working through the resulting mortgage discrepancy with their bank. Those are the cases that stay with me, not because they ended badly. Some of them are resolving, slowly. But because they remind me why the work matters even when the process is slow and the outcomes are incomplete. I was the person in that family who looked like she was going nowhere. Bookkeeping out of her apartment. No title, no trajectory anyone could see, and for a long time, I let people believe that because believing it kept them from looking too closely. The most useful thing I have ever been is the person nobody thought to watch. That hasn't changed even now. I still drive a car that's 8 years old. I still live in the same apartment. I still bring mediocre potato salad to the 4th of July, because it's the one thing my family expects from me, and I've never corrected the impression. Some cover stories you keep even after you don't need them anymore, not out of strategy, just because they fit.